up your nose
with a rubber hose. Twice. Thou shalt go up it. Twice. That was a Shakespearean thing, I believe.
Hello and welcome to Mount Rushmore. My name's Jeff, and I'm joined as always by my good buddies Richard.
Hello.
And Michael.
Howdy.
You know, a wise man once said, "A setback is a setup for a comeback." Today we're going to talk about those who have been, then they have been gone, then they have been back again. And this was Michael's choice. Why did you choose it?
I chose it because I think that either the underdog story is always really nice, but I also like the idea of someone being, like you said, on top of the world, and then having fell and then having to come all the way back.
Yeah, I do feel like it's weird we live in Los Angeles, and the only crime you can have here is to not be famous. And I feel like that's the amazing the judgmental society that we live in. Like, you could be happy, but nobody gives a fuck about that. But if you have had and then you have not, then you're a complete loser idiot.
I think there's an interesting thing about comebacks too. It seems to be like a repeating motif for some people, and maybe we'll talk about that a little later on too. Okay. But like sometimes there are like the Tom Hankses of the world who's never had to have a comeback.
Yeah. Right.
He has just been such this constant state of Tom Hanksiness from 1980 until now that there's never been a moment where he's faltered.
What was the closest? Probably Joe versus the Volcano,
which is a great movie.
Which is like immediately followed by like Big or something.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah.
It's like he has this weird sort of like, I guess that's the one that you could have been like, oh my God, what was he thinking? But you go back and watch it now.
I wonder if he actually felt bad because 2 years in a row he won the Best Actor Oscar, and the next year he didn't win the Best Actor Oscar.
What a loser!
What a shitty time for him.
Needed to come back after that, boys.
But then, so I guess that's how I initially approached it. Mm-hmm. But you can kind of apply this across a kind of broad spectrum of not just the movies, but anything and everything.
All right. Well, Michael, you chose the topic, so Richard, you start.
I'm a little screwed up here, guys, because I have the Mount Rushmore of comebacks. Like, I know you are, but what am I?
Oh, shoot.
So you're gonna need to give me about 5 minutes.
Well, are these all your mama jokes?
Yeah, they're all pretty much. I'm gonna have to make a comeback here, then, because
I know you are up your nose
with a rubber hose. Twice. Thou shalt go up it. Twice. That was a Shakespearean thing, I believe. So no, seriously, my first pick is I actually have categories this week. We haven't had categories from either of us in a while.
Your style.
One is political comebacks. One is musical comebacks.
Yep.
One is posthumous comebacks.
Yep. And
one is failed comebacks.
Wait, so that sounds like 2 comebacks and then 2 not comebacks. If you're dead,
failed. It's a comeback.
If you die.
Just Jeff, how about you let me do the
roll
thing
with
first?
It, baby. I'm trying to be more contentious. I'm the judge that never says overruled.
We'll get to it. I think I can make my case.
Right, I like that Jeff tried to gavel you down, and then you're like, let me get that gavel out of your hands.
You're out of order. This whole system's out of order. So let's start with the political comeback, and that would be Richard Milhouse Nixon.
Okay.
Or Milhouse, I don't know.
Now our second worst president.
Right.
Yeah, that's funny.
By like a long, like he's in his grave just being like, whoo.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
Him and Chester Arthur are like,
glad I dodged that one. Thank you.
I mean, you're talking about somebody who narrowly lost the presidency in 1960.
Yeah.
Basically because on TV he sweated a lot and had a 5 o'clock shadow.
God, it was so nice back then.
Wasn't it, when that was the thing that could determine an election?
Your telegenicness was,
Yeah. And then in 1962, loses the election for California governorship to the incumbent Edmund Brown, father of Jerry Brown, who I almost thought of as a political choice. That also would have been a really good one.
Yeah.
And basically gives the you won't have Richard Nixon to kick around anymore speech after 62. He was actually favored up until election night. Most people thought he was going to win a narrow election, and he wound up losing by like 5 points. And so very bitterly gets up there and just basically says, this is going to be the last press conference I'm ever going to give, and you won't have Richard Nixon to kick around anymore.
Richard Nixon, noted liar.
Occasionally. And then 6 years later, he's winning in a landslide for president and is reelected in a landslide in 72.
It's amazing how rarely that happens, especially nowadays. Once you get tainted with the whiff of being a loser, at least politically,
right?
You're just like, Hillary tried it this last year,
and it just clung to her like a stink.
Yeah, it probably couldn't. People had shorter memories or different memories, or they forgave a lot easier.
You were allowed to to not win. It wasn't like, I think the 24-hour news cycle. It's just like, if you don't win, you have been in the spotlight for X number of years.
Yeah,
and it's all for naught. So go away and let somebody else have their turn. Yeah, and obviously Nixon is elected, and everything goes great, and he gets his 2 terms. And wait, hold on a second. Is that not how that? I'm getting reports here that may not have been how it actually turned out. But yeah, I mean, he basically, after 62, he says he's not going to be involved in politics. As a candidate, goes and works at a law firm, but basically spends all his time campaigning for GOP candidates around the country, and builds up this sort of base, and builds up their sort of not just approval of him, but also in a lot of ways owing him a favor.
Oh, okay.
So that when he decides to run in 68, he's the candidate who's got the backing of the machine, so to speak. And yeah, I mean,
didn't he also say anything he wanted to, and he rapped and stuff like that? And he was kind of, no, that's Bulworth.
Yeah, okay, Bulworth. Previously discussed shitty movie, secretly shitty movie. But yeah, just Nixon is the ultimate, I think, example of someone who that as Americans, we should have figured out. And we kept figuring it out, and then we kept letting him kind of get in the back door. Mm-hmm. And then suddenly, there you've got Nixon in 68.
Yeah.
How'd this happen?
Well,
if only there were some parallels to today.
It's one of those things where you think of, maybe we got it right the first time.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Come on, guys.
Yeah.
You kept him from being president, and now here he is again.
Right.
You kept him from being governor, even.
Yeah.
I mean, come on, guys.
He's like, best 3 out of 5.
And but I also think part of it is just the idea that sort of having been kicked around kind of built up this
callous.
Yeah, callous, or built up this this feeling of being put upon. Mm-hmm. After the 62 gubernatorial race, he complained that the media didn't treat him favorably. Sounds familiar.
Yeah.
I mean, but it just sort of it built up this sort of bitterness and sort of hostility to everything else that was around him, that wound up being the catalyst, not only for how he, was elected in 68, but Watergate basically was just him being paranoid and not trusting anything outside of his increasingly small sphere.
Yeah. The parallels are pretty creepy and weird thinking about Trump today. They say that the White House Correspondents' Dinner, the one where Obama basically just tore apart Trump, was the thing that kind of set the wheels in motion for this person that basically declared himself that he was going to get his own revenge, because he was just so torn apart, and because of how bad the president made him look publicly.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
Well, I mean, Trump spent years with the whole birtherism nonsense, and then that seemed to be the catalyst of him just like tearing him apart and making fun of him. That was just like, well, now I'm going to actually run for president.
Cool. Michael, go for it.
So in 1991, I went to England for 6 weeks.
Why'd you come back?
I still have an accent.
That's right. I was, what's all this?
Hello, what's all this then with the podcast?
I was 12 years old and had a miserable time. That's all set up for, as soon as I got off the plane, when I came back to LA, my dad said, "Did you know that Pee Wee Herman was arrested for masturbation in a Florida theater?" And it was such like a strange, like, we're going to dinner.
Wait, how old were you when this happened?
I was 12. And it was just such a weird thing. It was like Pee Wee Herman, I don't think he said the word masturbation, but he was like, Pee Wee Herman was arrested for playing with himself in like an adult theater. And it's just like, well, back to California.
I leave this country for 5 minutes.
Look what happens.
So my first choice is the comeback of Pee Wee Herman.
Oh, wow.
And I think he went about it in a very smart way. in that he was arrested for doing something that was pretty despicable, especially for a children's television.
Yeah.
It's not that despicable in the hindsight of things, in that he was in an adult.
There's a lot worse things.
Yes.
In the grand scheme of things.
Yes. But being who he was and being a children's star, basically, it was just the kind of the end of the world for a few weeks.
Yeah.
But the greatest thing that he did was make fun of himself and own up to it almost immedately.
Oh, at the MTV Music Awards, or I think it was?
Yeah, it was like the movie awards, and he came out and he just said, "Heard any good jokes lately?"
Yeah.
And then, did a so funny I forgot to laugh sort of thing. And he kind of owned it and then laid low for a long time. It was almost in the same way that, who is that? There's a British comedian, Hugh Grant, who was arrested for picking up a transvestite hooker.
Yeah.
And then, within a couple of days went on Jay Leno and was he basically said, "I'm sorry." And then it never really stuck to him. It's the people that can't get away from their scandals that they just kind of are defined by them. But with Pee-wee, he just for a few years went on to have like really tiny roles in other films. Like he was in Buffy the Vampire Slayer.
Right.
And he was in Batman Returns.
Yeah.
And
he wasn't he?
He played the Joker's dad.
Yeah.
And he had played a really strange character in Mystery Men. And he just had these little small non-Pee-wee roles for many years. And then eventually it was like 2007. He started dressing as Pee-wee again and doing things. And then 2010 he had like a big
Broadway show.
Show. He had like a new Pee-wee's Playhouse sort of show. Yeah. And then last year, or I guess maybe 2 years ago now, he had his his Netflix like the next Pee-wee movie, and like all of the sins of whatever he was accused of and whatever he did are kind of just forgotten, and he kind of came back and is now like 60-something-year-old Paul Rubens still now doing Pee-wee Herman, but it's no one really cares, and he kind of. Sure, it's strange that a man still dresses up as like a, in this man-child persona, but he got back from that.
Yeah.
Which is, I think this is what ultimately was the first thing I thought of when I was thinking of this category.
Why do you think he's back? Is it because time has separated us from it, or so many people are so more horrible than Paul Rubens masturbating in a movie theater?
I honestly think it's not that people have done worse things. I think time has been very kind to him, and that he kind of allowed a generation to grow up and be okay with it.
Yeah.
Like, if this happened in 91, where this is almost 30 years later, 27 years later, and people like that, maybe it is that it's not as bad as you think it is.
Yeah, I mean, look at Fred Willard. He got caught basically doing the exact same thing, and
he did?
It was sort of embarrassing. Yeah, I was like up here on Hollywood Boulevard. I believe it was at the Tiki Symposium Theater.
Wow.
Not that I would know the name of the place, but I'm just saying I think that's where it was. And if you mention me, by the way, you get a $2 discount off the cover. No, but it was like 2-3 years ago,
right.
and it was just he said, "Whoops, sorry," and
moved along.
Nobody gave a crap. I think he lost like one gig.
Yeah.
It was like, that was it.
I don't think so.
Oh, my widow wed. I pulled out my widow wed wagon.
The Hugh Grant one, I was convinced was a PR move, because I think I may have said this on the podcast before. I believe he played all the foppish British twits he could, and that he was one thing, and the one thing he wasn't was sexy, and that now he does this thing. He's now a bad boy, and now he's got a whole range of scripts that he can do now. Nobody agrees with me.
I'm trying to think
Jeff,
of
the thing that maybe you could maybe say it. But
Sequel: 5 weddings and 7 funerals and a career funeral. Okay, so you're next, Richard.
All right, so my next choice is the musical comeback.
Yep.
And that would be Elvis Presley.
Yeah, it's on my list.
It's on your list. I kind of figured this would be the one that we'd both have. And very specifically the comeback special, which actually, of course, wasn't called the comeback special. That'd be a little
It was just called
awkward.
Elvis.
It's like Elvis, yeah. Which I did not know until doing the research here, was actually supposed to be a Christmas special.
Oh.
That was originally what Colonel Tom Parker had pitched it as. But the producer said, well, instead of doing this, Elvis, why don't you just start singing some of the songs from your back catalog? And that was sort of the catalyst, not only for the episode, for the special, which wound up being a huge hit, but then his next album, which is Elvis from Memphis, where he basically got, in a lot of ways, it's sort of the bridge between his early to mid 60s rock and roll sound with what you would eventually get in the 70s. So it's kind of like this combination of the two. You know, this Chips Moman, who was an engineer at Stax Record for a long time, was the producer of this. So it had that kind of Stax soul vibe to it, but it also had strings and things like that, which would kind of push him more towards what the sound would be like in the 70s. And it's a fantastic album. The album's got In the Ghetto, written by Mac Davis. Suspicious Minds, which was not on the album, but was recorded at the same time, was a huge hit for him by his last one or two of his last big hits. And it's just that I know we talked about this in the Elvis episode that we did a few episodes ago, but it might be the iconic Elvis look if you're actually in shape enough to pull it off. Yeah. Right?
Yeah.
I thought what was interesting about the comeback special was why he needed to come back. I mean, he was 33. It's not like he was past his prime. He is, in theory, in the prime of being, a sexual pop icon. But, he'd spent 6 years after leaving the military basically making
travelogues,
kind of garbage movies. And his recording career wasn't really going anywhere. He had kind of missed and been outdone by the British invasion, and been outdone by a more psychedelic 60s and free love and the hippies and
a harder rock sound.
Also. And he kind of became very antagonistic to that as well, to the drug use and the experimentation. And it's weird to think of Elvis as someone that suddenly is the person that your dads listen to.
Yeah.
And it seemed like he had kind of turned into that by his military career and by making these travel films. Right. When 10 years before, he was the person that, oh my God, he's shaking his hips, and you can't
swiveling hips, man.
Yeah, you can't show this to children. Children can't listen to this rock and roll, and it's the devil's music. And all of a sudden, it's like he is now the person that parents are okay with.
Yeah,
with all of a sudden.
That's fascinating. I think that time nobody knew how long rock and roll was going to be a thing, and it evolved so quickly. Think how many times bands like the Beatles evolved rock. So here's a guy who is going back to its musical roots of rockabilly and Chuck Berry and stuff, and that was only 4 years ago.
Yeah.
It's so amazing. But people probably thought this rock and roll thing was going to be something that was going to be over within a year anyhow. I'm fascinated that this is your next pick because I've become enamored of this producer from back in the day named Steve Binder.
Right, who produced the comeback special,
and produced Pee-wee's Playhouse.
Are you kidding
too.
me?
Yeah.
I did not know that part.
That's funny.
Yeah, weird.
Trying to find a through line between those two.
Yeah. But he also said
shellacked black hair, I guess.
It does remind me of what you need to have a comeback, and sometimes you need a tragedy that happens. It seems that it comes from outside or inside. And in case of Pee-wee, were he not arrested, would he have ever been able to branch out and not be branded as anything other than Pee-wee? Could he be Paul Rubens if he hadn't have been arrested? And so in a way, Pee-wee got arrested. Paul Rubens was free to do these character bits and stuff that he'd done before.
That's interesting.
And then Steve Binder was the one who told Elvis, you're in a rut. Your movies are horrible.
Yeah.
He pulled him away from Colonel Tom and worked with him on the idea of the show, stripping down all the artifice. Colonel Parker wanted all that stuff, and he pulled him away from that because he was 23 or 24 at the time. So he was able to give him
that young.
He was 23 when he did the Tammy show. So I think that was in 65.
My God.
65 or something like that. So
is this Elvis?
No,
this is
Steve Binder.
This
Binder,
producer,
sorry.
Steve Binder. So he might have been 26 years old, but he was definitely younger than any Hollywood person that Elvis had ever listened to. Definitely younger than Colonel Tom.
Sure.
So you need somebody to tell you the truth that your career's in the shitter, because Elvis surrounded himself with all these guys who were just yes men who were just on his payroll. So.
Right, of course.
Well, that's a really interesting pick. So speaking of comebacks, we're going to come back, but we're going to tell you about the things you can do to help spread the gospel of the Mount Rushmore podcast, and that is to go to the iTunes box and download, rate, and review all of our past episodes, or just rate and review, or just leave a review and just tell people what you think. We've had reviews like pretty good. So if you can do as good or better than that, we thank you. You could also go to the Facebook page and interact with us, leave a suggestion for a topic, leave your opinion about some of the shows that we've done, and follow us on Twitter and Instagram. Come back. We're back. Michael and Richard agreed on the second choice, so now we're going to go with Michael's third choice.
My third choice is, since this kind of has so far applied pretty broadly to music and applied to, I guess, an iconic TV character, I included a sports pick. And mine is, and in this last year, calendar year, or I guess in this full year, there have been a lot of like big comebacks, whether it was the Patriots in the Super Bowl coming back, or whether it was the Cleveland Cavaliers came back to do something. And
Sheboygan Shenanigans?
There was the Chicago Cubs was the other one.
Of baseball.
But I chose the 2004 ALCS Boston Red Sox comeback against the New York Yankees when they were down 3-0.
Blatantly appealing to the Bill Simmons crowd here.
Listen, if we can tag Bill Simmons on here,
that'd be great.
That would be awesome. And get one minutia of his audience.
Isn't ALCS a horrible disease?
To come back from that, please donate to Mount Rushmore. Just send us an email.
Well, is a sports comeback harder than an entertainment comeback? Or
this was one of those that had never been done before. They were losing in the championship series games 3-0 out of a best of 7 series, and that.
So the math means they were in trouble.
Yeah,
according to math,
and according to history,
and the fact that no team had ever come back from 3-0.
Yes. Mm-hmm. What's kind of a kicker was that in Game 3, they lost that game 19-8. So it wasn't just like that they were down 2-0. In the Game 3, the one that was like this dagger game, they got like killed. Mm-hmm. And then Game 4, they came back in extra innings to win a game, so they're down 3-1. And that was the one where they talked about. It's been talked about that there was like this very pivotal moment where a pinch runner was put in at just the right time and a ground ball got through.
Doyer's manager, Dave Roberts.
Oh, that's right. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And he came around to score ultimately, I can't remember if that was the tying run. I think that was the tying run
in the 9th, right?
And then they ultimately came back to win that game. So, okay, they're down 3-1. The next game was at that point, Game 5, and it ended up being the longest game in MLB history of being 5 hours and 49 minutes. God. And it was a 14-inning game that ended with like some.
There's like a rain delay there, wasn't there? At some point?
I don't remember. I don't know about that, but it was like.
Was there a streaker that came on the field?
Maybe
didn't a fan man come on? Fan guy, we got a
Morgana, the kissing bandit, ran out at 80 years old. But that had like a late inning heroics by David Ortiz, and then Game 6, same sort of thing. And by Game 7, I guess the Yankees' backs were broken, and the Red Sox kind of clobbered them. But
that's probably why they made the comeback. Their backs were broken.
Yeah. Why I chose this one versus other picks is like, they actually went on to win the World Series, and they swept the Cardinals, and like whatever mojo had happened, they kind of flipped that switch, and it was it broke an 86-year. World Series win streak, and it kind of destroyed the famed curse of the Bambino.
Yeah,
and there was a whole lot of history that was wrapped up in it being not just a comeback for the series itself, but it seemed for like that franchise and that city or whatever.
And the Yankees had been their nemesis throughout most of this. I mean, several times the Yankees had beaten them to either go to the World Series or keep the Red Sox out of the playoffs or something.
The year before, the two teams had met, and the Yankees in like the bottom of the 11th inning had won on a home run to knock them out. So it's like this was like their kind of revenge against them. And it just seemed to be one of the most poignant sort of sports type comebacks and what it meant for them as a team.
Oh, wow.
I mean, I can't stand them, and they can go to hell now, but whatever.
Was this the year that they did the Jimmy Fallon, Drew Barrymore movie that was about the failed
Red
Sox?
Yeah, that's a good pull.
Yeah, it is, and they didn't plan it that it was supposed to be like a.
Fever pitch.
I think which is based on it's supposed to be about soccer.
Oh,
by the way.
Ben Elton, was that one of the British?
It's Nick Hornby.
Hornby, okay.
Yeah, he wrote it. I think they even have there's a British movie version of it with Colin Firth, I believe.
Oh, okay.
But yeah, I think that in the adaptation, they had the Red Sox winning the World Series, but they shot it like before the World Series. So they had no way of knowing that the Red Sox are actually going to win the World Series.
Mm-hmm. I think they maybe. Is
that right? I think that's right.
They might have actually filmed during the.
Or maybe that's it. Like they were, I don't know. Who cares? It's a shitty Jimmy Fallon movie. I've now spent more time talking about a Jimmy Fallon movie than I ever thought I would.
Yeah, never mind. Who cares, everybody? Look it up on Google.
Why don't you Google it?
Why don't you Google it?
Richard.
All right. So my second choice, or third choice, let me take that back. My third choice, this is the contentious one, I believe, and this is the posthumous.
I object.
Overruled.
Okay.
How did that just happen?
How did that happen?
And this is Michael Jackson. And let me explain this to you. And this was actually Sarah's suggestion. So if you would like me to call her on the phone, we can patch her in.
Guy brings his wife into the argument.
I like
If you punch me, you're punching a girl.
Exactly.
I like that he's laying it on his wife right here.
Yeah.
Don't blame me. Yeah, she did it.
Pretty much.
I saw it on Fox News.
Fake news. My wife is fake news. No, and we were talking about it, and she brought up the point that when Michael Jackson died, nobody he was persona non grata, right? Mm-hmm. Like he hadn't made an album in 6 years, whatever it was.
He was a weirdo pedophile.
Yeah, he was a weirdo pedophile who had like 50-foot tall statues of himself like made and thought that he was some sort of like Eastern European dictator.
Yeah.
And like, was toxic. And then he died, and then everyone kind of just forgot about all that. And it stuck. And now Michael Jackson's legacy is of this musical genius, made music that transformed the music industry and his artistry and his talent and all this stuff. We don't talk about the bad stuff anymore. Mm-hmm. It's easier now to kind of push that aside when he's not alive. Mm-hmm.
It's easier.
He's not like a person who's there that you have to like contrast it against.
It's easier too, but I think for him that stuff lingers in the same way that it just does. It doesn't with some people that have apologized and admitted their sins. I understand what you're saying, and I think it's a fine pick. I think that when you're writing the Michael Jackson biography, I think that there's still too much in that, like, ooh, there's so much left.
Yeah.
I think there's an unresolvedness of his life.
Oh, sure. I mean, I think if you were looking at the sum of his life, absolutely. But if you're just taking it on a very sort of visceral, I hear a lot more Michael Jackson songs on the radio now than I did 10 years ago.
Yeah.
And I think partially it's like the Saturday. Did you ever see the Saturday Night Live skit with Dana Carvey, where he's like playing his like kind of dumb songwriter,
chopping broccoli?
Yeah, that guy.
Yeah, okay.
And they come to him and basically suggest that he dies because it's as a career move.
Yeah,
it's the line about Elvis.
Yeah,
someone, it's supposed to be John Lennon or somebody hears that Elvis dies and he just says, "Great career move." So it kind of to me, I just feel like that's what. Actually, to Sarah, to put this on her. To her, it really is, though. It's something where I think the fact that he died makes it easier for people to go, oh, God, I love Billie Jean. Mm-hmm. And Bad was really a good album. Boy, there's a lot of good songs on that.
I will add to that narrative. In the timeline, there was all this stuff. There was the salacious trial and the camp of journalists who were parked out reporting on it, and the comedians joking about it on late night television, and then his acquittal, I think.
Right.
And then there was an amount of understanding that wasn't being meted out to every individual.
Nuance?
Yeah, there was a nuanced understanding, especially after all those TV specials. Or especially after creepy Joe Jackson gets up and uses the funeral of his son as a platform to announce a recording artist that he was.
Yeah.
So we realize Michael Jackson was a very unusual person who led a horrible childhood. And
it's easier to view him as sort of a victim himself when he's no longer there to have to look at and say, oh yeah, what's your face?
Yeah.
And now you're white and and there's all these things you've been accused of. Mm-hmm. When he's not there anymore, it's easier, I think, to make him kind of a victim of, like you said, this shitty childhood and all this weird stuff that he had happen.
It's easier to kind of sand over the rough edges, so to speak, when someone's not constantly moving the table on you.
And to take a current example, we are recording this the weekend that Chuck Berry has passed away. And again, it's one of those things where it's like,
oh yeah.
You can celebrate the music, and I'm sure that I'm going to hear Chuck Berry when I put on the oldie station when I drive home today. But there's a lot of rough edges with Chuck Berry.
Yeah.
There's a lot of not so cool stuff that was happening. But it's just time sort of wipes that away, and especially if someone who dies. Let me put it this way. He was, when Michael Jackson died, he was rehearsing for that, the final tour, This Is It. If he hadn't have died, and he just came out and did the tour, what would the reaction have been to that tour? Some people would have really loved it. I'm sure other people have been boycotting or protesting. And a lot of other people would have said, "Oh, I don't give a shit. It's just Michael Jackson, 2008 or 9, whatever. I don't care."
Yeah,
it would have had an amazing response in Brazil.
Yeah, exactly. People in Poland would have gone batshit for it. But now we look at it and it's like, boy, wouldn't it have been great if we could have seen that?
Okay, Michael, what's your final choice?
Richard, you mentioned posthumous sort of return. I have a really big comeback.
Oh, I think I know where you're going here.
Big J Man. Jesus Christ.
That's a good one.
Oh, wow.
He made the ultimate comeback, really, for our sins.
I actually thought you were going to say Rasputin, but that's JC's also a good one.
That's pretty good when you can come back and then hang around.
Allegedly.
Yeah, and then hang around for 40 days and then be like, you know what? Peace out.
Ghost.
I'm gone.
Yeah.
I got another comeback in me. We'll see when that happens. He might make this list twice if we end up doing a redo of this Rushmore. You never know. The end times might be coming.
And all three of us will probably be still around to record the next session. So
maybe this podcast will come out on Easter anyway. So
did I time it right? I probably
didn't.
I'm not super religious, so I really had to read up on the resurrection of Jesus Christ. But honestly, in all joking aside, I was really going to put zombies on here. And then I thought, you know what? Let's be a little
the original zombie.
That's right, Jesus Christ, the original zombie. I didn't grow up reading the Bible. I went to a non-religious Sunday school.
Yeah,
I went to.
If Todd McFarlane wrote the Bible.
Jesus' eyes were huge, and he had that spaghetti
slobbering,
and he had the spaghetti webbing, which was really cool. When Jesus would start thwipping people with his spaghetti webbing, that's ridiculous. But
wait, you did go to Sunday school?
I went to.
It was school. It was on Sunday.
So I went to a Unitarian church as a child for many years. But ultimately, I think it was just a place for my mom and dad to drop me off on a Sunday so they could go work out at the gym. And that's 100% true. It was from 10 to 12 that I would go to church and kind of learn about the Bible, sort of, but mostly I'd play G.I. Joe and He-Man on in the bushes with my friend Clark. And then we'd go to McDonald's afterwards. So I don't have I have and I should have taken a Bible studies class in college just so I could pick up on, literature, just the literature of the Bible. So reading about the resurrection of Jesus and him coming back and, I was I literally don't know any of them. I see names and maybe I'm not helping my case here.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is not,
You feel like Bart spending the night at the Flanders house.
Do you play a video game?
So my house has been under repair for the last 2 weeks from rains, and our ceiling fell in and all this stuff. And I had
a flood of biblical proportions.
Tower of frogs.
And I had to get these paint cans that we had downstairs and bring them upstairs for the guy that's kind of doing some touch-up paint. Mm-hmm. And then I was bringing them back downstairs and putting them in the cabinet. And I thought to myself, old painty can Ned. It's just some stupid thing that they mocked on The Simpsons of mocking when they had to stay at their house. And that's so off topic right now. Yeah. But basically, Jesus Christ, Son of God, right hand of God, came back from being dead. He was in his tomb. And then all of a sudden.
Yeah. Pretty much all I know about Jesus Christ is based on Andrew Lloyd Webber.
Yeah.
If it's not in Jesus Christ Superstar, then I'm.
But eventually he was resurrected and was kind of did some more things for 40 days, and then he's like, I got a bus to catch.
I know that's not a creation myth, but like the deities in general usually have a pretty kick-ass resurrection story. Usually they go through some transformation,
I find it interesting that, people kind of assume that Jesus was a real person. Like they tend to believe that he existed and he did good things and he preached good things. And it's just when he came back where it starts, the history gets a little iffy. And, at that point, Christianity is born and people start believing that he actually is God or a part of God or one and the same with God. And that's when I kind of tune out too.
Okay. Well, that's a heavy choice. So it was almost kind of escalated from Elvis to Michael Jackson to God. So
well, one was the king of rock and roll and one was the king of kings.
Yeah.
Right.
So
one was the king of pop.
One was the king of pop.
King
a lot of kings.
King of pop.
All right.
King of kings.
I can't compete. I can't.
I hope
you guys
you've
further.
got-
Where do I go from here?
I hope the Sacramento Kings are involved in your sports pick.
if it was like the Lakers come back against the Kings,
Maybe it can be
incredible.
is it LeBron James because he's the king? They call him the
it's
king.
true. No, it is not.
No.
Okay. Well, Richard, you know one.
My last one. It is the failed comeback.
That's right. That's right.
Overruled.
And it's the we didn't say it had to be good comebacks or great comebacks. We just said comebacks.
Come to the bench for a sidebar. Wait, go away from me. I don't want you here anymore.
And this is the Swedish tennis star Bjorn Borg. Certainly the second most famous Bjorn out of Sweden ever, behind one of the guys from ABBA. So Bjorn Borg, perhaps the greatest tennis player, certainly of the mid to late 70s into the early 80s. The style icon, copied by Richie Tenenbaum in the Royal Tenenbaums. You know Bjorn Borg, and he won something like, I think 6 Wimbledons, 5 French Opens, was just a dominant player of his era, and was sort of known as the Iceman because he loved drinking ice, just chewing it because he just had this very stoic demeanor on the court. Nothing fazed him. He just, whether he lost a point or won a point. And in an era where you had McEnroe and Jimmy Connors and Ilianosti and Vitas Gerulaitis, these guys are these big, sort of flamboyant, cursing out umpires and yelling at the other players and stuff like that. This was just the ultimate contrast, just this very focused, laser focused. I'm going to do my job, and basically I'm just going to beat you and be very almost boring about it. But was incredibly effective. Winds up retiring in 1982 at the age of 26, which is really the prime for a tennis player. Is mid to late 20s. You've still got prime years left. But he felt burnt out. He had lost to John McEnroe in a couple of Grand Slam finals in a row, and basically just felt like, I've been doing this for so long. I know that I'm not the best player in the world now. It's McEnroe. And if I'm not going to be the best player in the world, why should I do this?
Packing up his racket and going home.
Yeah, pretty much taking off both of his shoes and one of his socks. So he goes away for about 9 years.
Wow.
Yeah, leaves sport for 9 years. In the meantime, does all the things that you would expect a...
Hustling illegal badminton games.
Yeah.
Does he come back and they play on laser rackets now?
Right.
This game is not what I was.
Yeah, he has a lot of the problems you would expect from a athlete who that's all he's ever done and then retires at 26 and tries to figure out what the hell he's doing. As in, multiple divorces, paternity lawsuits, alleged cocaine addictions, financial bankruptcy from trying to design his own, have his own clothing line.
Tries to sue Star Trek: The Next Generation.
That's Borg.
That's my cube.
Okay, so interesting about this.
What Ernest Borgnine was going by the Borg for a while.
Interesting that you mentioned that. So in First Contact, there is that line. There's a line when they first... God knows I haven't seen this movie in 20 years, but they mentioned the Borg, and someone says, well, that sounds Swedish. And apparently, Roland Moore, one of the co-writers, has said, yes, that line was specifically in there because of Bjorn Borg.
That's ridiculous. Like the idea that anyone...
What do you mean? Why is that ridiculous? Is it ridiculous that a writer would reflect back on, make it a little meta joke about someone who was ridiculously popular 10 years ago?
No, that like 200.
Or is that a Bjork joke?
Or
She's Icelandic.
It's ridiculous that 200 years in the future there would be any sort of countries or that anyone would know who the Swedish are because they'd obviously be
That's
wiped
actually
out.
a good point.
They'd obviously be wiped out of this.
But
Yeah.
you don't think Swedish meatballs would have
They survived.
survived?
I take
Especially
everything.
if they're
I take
the
everything
IKEA
I say
ones.
back.
So he comes back in 1991. Decides to come back in 1991, maybe for the money, maybe not, but kind of just comes back after a couple months of training. Doesn't really like do the hardcore sort of training you would expect someone to do. Also decides to come back using his little shitty late 70s wooden rackets.
Oh no.
This is 1991. We've progressed to the giant graphite, rackets with the heads that are about 5 feet wide, roughly, and he's still got his little Roscoe, the type of thing you would buy from like the Sears catalog back in 1976. And needless to say, it did not go smoothly. He I believe he had 11 matches in his comeback, and he failed to win a single set in any of his matches. Uh-oh. And eventually went back and decided, well, I'm going to try again try to pick up the graphite rackets. Still didn't work, and then just had to slink back into retirement.
Oh wow!
And that's even worse to me. That's even worse than. I mean, there are a lot of failed sports comebacks. Like Tiger Woods right now is in the midst of a really bad failed comeback, where he's so injured to the point where they're telling him he had to miss a tournament and stay as horizontal as possible because his back was so bad.
Oh, wow.
Also, staying as horizontal as possible is what got him into the mess in the first place. But this would be like if Tiger Woods decided to come back, or like Jack Nicklaus decided to come back at 65 and still want to use his wooden clubs.
Yeah.
It's like that. It's like, dude, what are you trying to accomplish here? What are you trying to prove? Mm-hmm. And even in interviews years later, he's like, I don't know what I was trying to prove. It was just madness. I don't know why he did that. Mm-hmm. So it's, and I grew up playing tennis. I grew up watching tennis, and I remember when this was happening, thinking, this is, I was probably 15 at the time. This is really odd.
Yeah.
This can't go well.
Yeah.
Because a lot of times the comebacks, you still think, oh, wouldn't it be great if so and so could come back? Boy, even when Magic Johnson came back after HIV diagnosis a few years later. And he wasn't great, but he had some moments where he was still really good. There were no moments where Bjorn Borg was really good.
Yeah.
It was bad.
Yeah.
Bad.
I think the comebacks are fascinating because there are almost as many motivations as there are individuals who mount comebacks, but within the realms of entertainment and athletics that we've been discussing, I think there are factors. When you're an athlete, I think you might be motivated by two things: ego and money. So I think in some cases the money's just so good that the opportunity to step back in that arena, coupled with the fact that these people didn't get to be the heads of their enterprise by having no ego. They became like Michael Jordan still discusses a comeback when he's interviewed. He still thinks he can do that.
Right.
And that's the drive that got them to the top of their profession in the first place, is also the poison that makes it hard for them to bow out when they should.
And I think that's what's really fascinating to me about the Bjorn Borg comeback is he didn't seem to have that. Like you would think, okay, if you had been number one in the world, you go away for 9 years, you're going to mount this improbable comeback. You would be training for 6 months ahead of time. You would make sure you have, the best coaches with you and the best fitness people, and you would have the best equipment. Mm-hmm. And he's just out there being stubborn as hell. Just, nope, I'm going to use my a shitty wooden racket that I used 10 years ago, and I'll be fine.
Yeah.
And nope.
Pass me a beer.
Yeah.
The weirdest film montage, I'm sure, when we see it on cinema. Okay, so I'm just going to quickly toss in my choice, and that is Robert Downey Jr. Here's a guy who I think was able to succeed because the world changed around him. There are a lot of these people, like I think Paul Rubens, in which they got toppled off their high horse, but they didn't really crawl their way back up. It's just the world kind of changed and rotated around them to the point where whatever mistake they'd made was a little bit more acceptable. Or in the case of Robert Downey Jr., he started finding roles playing flawed people. When you need somebody to play a character like Tony Stark, Iron Man in the Iron Man franchise, a character who has a lot of flaws, is a substance abuser, has ego, has been bigger than life and then brought down a peg. You can hire an actor that has had all those things happen to him, and really you hardly need to write the script or have him say any dialogue.
Right.
He's already there. So that's my choice. But now I'm going to kind of rattle off who I think should be the winner of this episode on comebacks. And I do think it's fascinating because of all the things that do motivate people returning to the arena of battle after being gone. Here's who I think should win. So I really love Pee Wee Herman as a choice. He was somebody who was a seminal character. And I think, like the Richard Nixon choice, he's somebody who, when Pee Wee Herman first came out, he was a creepy, weird children's host.
Right.
And then he became more mainstream and accepted.
Yeah, like the early Groundlings.
Yeah,
Pee Wee
yeah.
is like creepy.
It's like he's
intentionally.
Yeah, intentionally creepy. So, like Richard Nixon, we were all right the first time.
Right.
There was something weird about this guy. So when he does get caught red-handed,
so to speak,
then we all kind of nod our heads like, yeah, we always thought there was something up with that guy. And I love that you both chose the Elvis comeback special. And I do think there is a little bit of a through line between Pee Wee and Elvis, in that they both have this nostalgia. Pee Wee definitely was a character who harkened back to 50s nostalgia. And Elvis himself was kind of harkening back to that in his comeback special. That was a neat little crossover. Then, from here on out, it's all about the Richard. It's all about Manfredi. I did enjoy the Michael Jackson choice and all the reasoning behind it, because it did paint such an interesting picture of this very damaged person who went from being this very twisted, damaged person to considered one of the most amazing, glowing, charismatic figures on the planet. And then to see him fall again. And then posthumous, the idea that give it some time and we'll forgive all ills, and that will put you back into this high pedestal. And then the Bjorn Borg narrative was just so interesting because it just reminded me of everybody's uncle.
Are you saying he's Uncle Rico? That he could hit that tennis ball over that mountain?
But it does seem like that guy kind of, after the divorce, kind of looking through his closet trying to find a shirt that, looks good and heading back for one last household.
Coach just
70s.
put me in. I would have made state.
So thanks, guys, for coming with us on this journey. We hope you'll come back for the next episode of the Mount Rushmore podcast.
See what you did there,
Jeff.
It
was so easy. I just had to do it.
That's what she said.
Yes.
Wrong episode, guys.
Comebacks like plenty. This has been Mount Rushmore. I'm Richard.
I'm Michael.
I'm Jeff.